Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare. Anjaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Ashtotar Tata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Ashtotar Tata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. All right, we're going to be on page 148 today, text 11. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 30th day of April 2025 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 3, Karma Yoga, the text 11 on page 148. Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantu vaha paraspadam bhavayantah shreyak paramavapsyata devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantu vaha Padaspadam bhavayantah Shreyak paramavapsyata Devan bhavayatanena Te deva bhavayantu vaha Padaspadam bhavayantah Shreyak paramavapsyata. You want to try it? Devan bhavayatanena Te deva bhavayantu vaha Te deva bhavayantu vaha. No. Go to the next line. Paraspadam bhavayanta avapsyata Shreyak padam avapsyata Devan bhavayatanena Te deva bhavayantu vaha Paraspadam bhavayanta Shreyak paramavapsyata. Want to try it here? Not yet. Okay. Kathy, not yet. Chad, you there? Oh, you must be pretty sick. Okay. I'll read with the words. Devan, demigods. Bhavayata, having pleased. Anena, achieve. Okay. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifice, will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. Purport. The demigods are empowered administrators of material affairs. The supply of air, light, water, and all other benedictions for maintaining the body and soul of every living entity is entrusted to the demigods, who are innumerable assistants in different parts of the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Their pleasures and displeasures are dependent on the performance of yajnas or sacrifices by the human being. Some of the yajnas are meant to satisfy particular demigods. But even in so doing, Lord Vishnu is worshipped in all yajnas as the chief beneficiary. It is stated also in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna himself is the beneficiary of all kinds of yajnas, bhoktaram yajnatapasam. Therefore, ultimate satisfaction of the yajnapati is the chief purpose of all yajnas. When these yajnas are perfectly performed, naturally the demigods in charge of the different departments of supply are pleased, and there is no scarcity in the supply of natural products. Performance of yajnas has many side benefits, ultimately leading to liberation from material bondage. By performance of yajnas, all activities become purified, as it is stated in the Vedas. Ahara shuddhau sattva shuddhau tuva smritihi smriti lambhe sarva grantinam vipramokshaha. By performance of yajna, one's eatables become sanctified, and by eating sanctified foodstuffs, one's very existence becomes purified. By the purification of existence, finer tissues in the memory become sanctified, and when memory is sanctified, one can think of the path of liberation, and all these combined together lead to Krishna consciousness, the great necessity of present-day society. Om jnana timirandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of the disciplic succession. So, how did we arrive here at worship of the demigods? There are places, several places in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna discourages worship of the demigods. But here the principle of sacrifice is being emphasized. If you recall, the key verse was text 9. Work has to be performed as a sacrifice for Vishnu. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. So, and then Krishna says, in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna or sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." So now he's talking about sacrifice for Vishnu. He's not talking about sacrifice for the demigods. He sent forth generations of men and demigods along with sacrifices for Vishnu. But in the next verse, which we read, the demigods being pleased by sacrifice will also please you. So there's kind of two things going on here. One is the sacrifice for Vishnu, or Krishna consciousness. And then there's this idea that we have to recognize, and suddenly everyone was on edge, realizing that we all depend on breathing, and the air could be contaminated and so forth. So there's a verse that says, Devarshi bhutaptan hrinam patrinam nakinkaronayam hrini charajan sarvatmanayak sharanang sharanam gato mukundam paridittikartam. That he lists all different elements that we're indebted to as we live. Deva, he begins with devas, the demigods. Devarshi, and rishis, teachers. Just like our teachers, our grade school teachers, our high school teachers. You know, we have so many teachers, beginning with our parents. They all take that role. So we're indebted to them. People in general that we depend on, Bhuta, Apta, forefathers, you know, where would we be without our grandfathers and grandmothers? So he has a whole list there. Rini means debtors. Patrinam, forefathers, immediate, you know, relatives and forefathers. So, but then he says, Sarvatmanayak sharanam sharanyam. If you take shelter of Krishna, the Lord of all, and you serve him, then all the debts are liquidated. Because it's important to understand these demigods. There's a demigod of the water, there's a demigod of the air, of the sun, right? All of Bhumi. There's a demigod for all these elements. And they're in charge of those, and we depend on them. Just like this very temple is dedicated to Govardhan, right? New Govardhan. So it commemorates the famous Govardhan Leela, which had several parts. You know, Krishna convinced his father that you don't have to worship the demigods. You don't have to worship Indra. And he preached kind of an atheistic philosophy to refute him. He's preaching karma mimamsa. Look, we perform karma, and Indra is like a functionary. In other words, if you do good things, then he has to give you good results. And if you do bad things, you do bad results. So you don't have to worry about Indra. You just worship, you just do your duty, and everything will be fine. So forget about this sacrifice for Indra. And instead, we should worship that which we really are dependent on, which is this big hill Govardhan. And there's a description in the Gopis' prayers how Govardhan is the best devotee of Krishna. Hantaya mandala hari dasya varyo yad Rama Krishna chadanas padasha pramoda manam tanodi sahagogana yostiyo yad pani yisuya vasakandana kandamulai. So he said, how wonderful it is that this hill, now the gopis are back in the village, and Govardhan Hill, if you ever go to Vrindavan, you got to get on a bus to go to Govardhan. It takes a little while. It's not right there. So when they say this, it means that they're meditating on Krishna so much when he's that they're feeling that they're right there with him. And they say this hill in their meditation is the best devotee of Krishna. Why? Because it supplies fresh water for the cows when he goes on them, you know, and beautiful, wonderful grasses that they can eat, and caves where the boys can play or take shelter when it rains, you know. And so one after another, and roots and things that they can snack on, also edible roots. So I list all of these things, so that Govardhan is such a dear devotee of Krishna. And indeed, we have Govardhan Shila on the altar. Rocks from the Govardhan can be worshipped as Krishna. You know, these Shilas are manifestations of Vishnu or Krishna. So that's... but that doesn't have, in that whole pastime is why you don't have to worship the demigods. You just worship Krishna, everything's taken care of. Prabhupada cites the last verse of the 5th chapter, where Krishna says, Bhoktadam yajnatapasam, I am the ultimate enjoyer of all sacrifices. But here he's saying that all the devas, they get measure of the sacrifice, right? And what did we read just today? Devan bhave te deva bhavayantu va. The demigods being pleased by sacrifices will also please you and provide the necessities. So he's describing kind of, something that he's later going to refute. Don't worry about the demigods. You don't waste your time worshiping the demigods. If you do that, you might go to heaven. But then if you go to material heaven, it may be much more pleasant than this place, but eventually you fall down again to this world of death. So you didn't make any progress going back to Godhead. And he has this one verse, Kamais taista rita jnana papadyante anya devata. Famous verse. Kamais taista rita jnana. When your intelligence is stolen away by too much material desire, then you worship these other demigods. In other words, this is a sign that you have work to do if you really want to get on the path back to Godhead. So anyway, this particular verse, he's talking about how the world works in one sense, and that the devas, taking my blessings, they will provide what you need, you see. But you should know, if you're intelligent, that ultimately it's all coming from me. And if you just worship me alone, everything's taken care of. The demigods become most pleased. And we see what happened with Indra after he tried to inundate Vrindavan, and he's so stupid. I mean, I always think that his name tells you everything. Indriyas are the senses, and his name is Indra. You can see the result, right? So he easily loses his temper. He easily gets frustrated. He easily gets, and then he has to apologize. And then he has to pray to, please forgive me, I didn't realize, I forgot how. Anyway, so that's Indra. It's always happening with him. But in this end of the 5th chapter, Krishna tells it as it is, Bhoktadam, I am the ultimate enjoyer of all sacrifices. If you understand that, you'll be fine. Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. Why? Because I am the Lord of all planets and all residents of the planets. Sarva Loka. And I am, and I'm not just a tyrant. Suridam Sarva Bhutanam. I am the best, dearest friend of every living entity. Now that's a key element, because Krishna's in our heart. When we occupied in your heart by your worst enemy, no, he's your best friend. He's giving you good instruction how you can get rid of all miseries and come back to him. We don't hear it, so he comes outside as the guru and the shastra and devotees. So he's using them as media by which he delivers the message, the super soul in the heart. He comes outside. So that's what this Bhagavad Gita is. And Krishna will go along in this way, and you talk about yajna. But as we already encountered in this chapter, when you talk about yajna, probably after a little while he gets the yes. And the best yajna in this age is Sankirtan yajna. It's a sacrifice. You don't have to get a whole 100 pots of ghee, and hire all the expert Brahmins to chant it exactly. You don't need that. You can't do it anyway. Where are they then? But you can't. Anyone, anytime, any place can practice this Sankirtan yajna. It takes about 1 minute to memorize that, or maybe 30 seconds to memorize the Hare Krishna mantra, and you're on your way, on your way. So that's the real yajna for this age, and everything is included. Your prosperity will be there. You'll have enough. What is it? The yoga kshema. I don't know. You weren't here last night, but you remember we were talking about yoga kshema. Krishna says, Ananyas chintayanto mam yejana payupasate tesham nityabhyuktanam yoga kshemam bahamyaham. So this is in the 8th chapter, and Krishna is talking. There's a kind of a section of the 8th chapter that's talking about meditation. So he's basically talking about thinking of me all the time. Ananyas, without any other distraction. Chintayanto mam, yejana, those people who do this, payupasate, and worship me by their intelligence. And so, tesham, for them, nityabhyuktanam, who are always linked to me by thinking of me, and like that. Yoga kshema vahamyaham. This is a very interesting line, because he says, vahami means I carry, I bring to them their yoga and shema. Now we may not know what that means, but we definitely know what the concept is. Yoga means all the things, in this context, all the things that you need to live. You need a home, and these poor homeless people. It's so heartrending. You see them, they're pushing along. There's this one lady, I don't see her all the time, but I said, she can hardly, push the cart with her stuff across the Cass Street, and the cars are just waiting to start their engines. The light is changing, but she just can't get across the street.
I don't know what she's got to go this way, that way, you know. So they don't have yogic shame, but they have some yoga, some things that they have, you know. It's all the possessions are in the cart, you know. But then they have to sleep and maybe lose things. So Krishna says, I provide what you need and I preserve what you have. So the kshema is your security. Because you can be in a very nice house with a very nice yard and you have all the things, you have a nice bank account. But if there's marauding bands of terrorists around, you know, then it's all useless. So you don't have the kshema. You may have the yoga for a little while, but you don't have the kshema. So you need both security and prosperity enough to live. So Krishna says, I personally carry that. For who? For whom? For those who are always thinking of me, who are always connected to me in yoga, you know, through bhakti. So it means that we shouldn't be overly absorbed in worrying about the necessities of life. We should take care of business, but we should be conscious of the fact that Krishna will provide if we're sincerely serving him. There may be some bumps in the road here or there, but if we remain faithful, then we'll be part of the devotee community and our needs will be met. You know, that's the idea. Okay, so the devas, Krishna is talking about the devas, and if we practice the yajna, they will provide what's needed with my blessing, you know, and I'm ultimately providing everything. So that was 11, I think, right? Yeah. Okay, 12. Ishtan bogan hivo deva dasyante yajna bhavitaha tayadattana pradayabhyo Yo bhunkte stena eva saha. Okay, this is a heavy verse. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna or sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he or she who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. Yo bhunkte stena. Stena is a thief. Purport. The demigods are authorized supplying agents on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. Therefore, they must be satisfied by the performance of prescribed yajnas. In the Vedas, there are different kinds of yajnas, sacrifices, prescribed for different kinds of demigods, but all are ultimately offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For one who cannot understand what the Personality of Godhead is, sacrifice to the demigods is recommended. According to the different material qualities of the persons concerned, different types of yajnas are recommended in the Vedas. Worship of different demigods is also on the same basis, namely according to different qualities. For example, the meat-eaters are recommended to worship the goddess Kali, the ghastly form of material nature. And before the goddess, the sacrifice of animals is recommended. But for those who are in the mode of goodness, so these word qualities. Hare Krishna, thanks for visiting us. Hare Krishna. Left side, left side, left side, left side, left side. There you go. Okay. For example, the meat-eaters are recommended to worship the goddess Kali, the ghastly form of material nature. And before the goddess, the sacrifice of animals is recommended. But for those who are in the mode of goodness, so sometimes the word qualities, Prabhupada uses the word qualities, namely according to different qualities. You see that phrase just a few lines up? Qualities means modes, in this case. According to the different modes of nature. For example, meat-eaters are goddess. But for those who are in the mode of goodness, the transcendental worship of Vishnu is recommended. But ultimately, all yajnas are meant for gradual promotion to the transcendental position. For ordinary men, at least 5 yajnas, known as Pancha Mahayajna, are necessary. One should know, however, that all the necessities of life that the human society requires are supplied by the demigod agents of the Lord. No one can manufacture anything. Take, for example, all the eatables of human society. These eatables include grains, fruits, vegetables, milk, sugar, etc. for the persons in the mode of goodness, and also eatables for the non-vegetarians like meats, none of which can be manufactured by men. Then again, take for example heat, light, water, air, etc., which are also necessities of life. None of them can be manufactured by the human society. Without the Supreme Lord, there can be no profuse sunlight, moonlight, rainfall, breeze, etc., without which no one can live. Obviously, our life is dependent on supplies from the Lord. Even for our manufacturing enterprises, we require so many raw materials like metal, sulfur, mercury, manganese, and so many essentials, all of which are supplied by the agents of the Lord, with the purpose that we should make proper use of them to keep ourselves fit and healthy for the purpose of self-realization, leading to the ultimate goal of life, namely liberation from the material struggle for existence. This aim of life is attained by performance of yajnas. If we forget the purpose of human life and simply take supplies from the agents of the Lord for sense gratification and become more and more entangled in material existence, which is not the purpose of creation, certainly we become thieves, and therefore we are punished by the laws of material nature. A society of thieves can never be happy because they have no aim in life. The gross materialist thieves have no ultimate goal of life. They are simply directed to sense gratification, nor do they have knowledge of how to perform yajnas. Lord Chaitanya, however, inaugurated the easiest performance of yajna, namely the Sankirtan yajna, which can be performed by anyone in the world who accepts the principles of Krishna consciousness. So there's kind of two things going on here. One is that you can't just take for granted the necessities of life. You have to understand where they come from. And if you're not a devotee of Vishnu or Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, then at least recognize the gods who are supplying them and perform the yajnas. But that's not recommended in the Bhagavad Gita, because the general tendency is to forget how they're getting the ability to give you what they give you from Krishna. You see, and this was one of the points of the Govardhan Leela. Indra was not aware that this little boy was actually his Lord, Krishna. You see, and so they said, "Those fools!" I put it into a little poem. So you can get that from the poem. When Krishna stopped King Indra's sacrifice, that monarch of the heavens threw a fit. Those cowards took that foolish boy's advice. Such insolence I never shall permit. So Indra sent the clouds of devastation to pour down catastrophic hail and rain, with lightning, thunder, winds without cessation. The cowards called to Krishna in their pain, to show his coward friends his boundless love, and crush King Indra's pride for his own good. Shri Krishna lifted Govardhan above, and saved his friends while 'neath the hill they stood. You see? So Indra was in complete ignorance. This is a sign of if you recall the previous chapter, how by too much meditation on the objects of the senses, what happens? You get attached to them, right? And from that, Dhyayadovashayan pungsa, sangas tesha bhajak. Sangha is attachment. It's interesting because there's so many pairs of words, there's so many words in Sanskrit, where the word means two things. One is the first stage of something, and then it's the development of it. Like sangha means to associate with. Well, how do you associate? Well, you can see, you can smell, you can hear, you can taste, right? Associate with the senses. So by that association, you get attached to something that's pleasurable, right? So sangha means both association and attachment. It means the practice or the fact or the agent that produces the second thing. They have the same name. Another one is gati. Gati means the goal. You can easily remember as this begins with the same letter. But it also means the way to achieve the goal, right? What do we sing? Shri Guru Chadana Rati Eseyu Tamagati. Attachment for the lotus feet of the spiritual master is the best means of advancement. Because then you're ready to get an order, you know, and you want to please that person by chanting the rounds and following the regs, you know, you're pleasing. So and that's what Prabhupada did. He was so, you know, full of love for Krishna and so caring for everyone, wanting to bring them to Krishna, that he automatically evoked their attachment and their love. And, you know, they were very eager to do things to please him, take on difficult assignments. You know, you start a temple in Germany. He sends, I think I forget his name, Shiva something. But he went there and he happened to speak German. You know, he learned German in high school, college, you know. And he pioneered preaching in Germany. Can you imagine that? Just to go off alone, you know, maybe 1 or 2 ways. Yeah. All because they love Prabhupada, as simple as that. And I was thinking yesterday, and suddenly a light went on in my head. The word dharma is like that. Dharma is also the same thing. Because, you know, you remember how we've been talking about dharma means the essential nature of something, right? I always give the example of the chair. Dharma has this here. You sit down on a chair and it supports you. And if it collapses when you sit on it, it's not following its dharma. It's violating its dharma, right? So, but then dharma is also the method by which you achieve your ultimate dharma. And what I mean by that is, the sages in Naimisharanya, they asked the Sutta Goswami, what is that supreme dharma by which the soul can be completely satisfied? You see? So he answered famous verses. Second chapter, text 6 through text 19 or 21, something like that. There's a whole lesson in bhakti. We made it into a book, Dharma, The Way of Transcendence. It's worth checking it out. So, he says, Savai pungsang paro dharmo yato bhakti hokshaje. Ahaitukya pratayata yayatma supasidati. So, the supreme dharma for all human beings, Savai pungsam as human beings, paro dharma, supreme dharma, is that which engenders devotional service to Krishna. Yato bhaktir adhokshaja. Adhoksha is a name for Krishna, a name for God, means he who is completely transcendental to the reach of our mind and senses and words, you know. So the only way we can get contact with him is if he reveals himself. If he what is it called? He makes an intervention, you see. He comes himself, he appears as the deity form. He also makes himself available through the great devotees who manifest them to him, teach us about him. And most important for us, the holy name. He makes himself available. So, then he says, it has to be free of material motivation and uninterrupted to fully satisfy the self. Now that means pure devotion. So we can work toward that. But this word ahoituki, hetu means cause. So normally we work for some cause, some motive, some goal. So it's not that bhakti is without a goal or motive, it's without a material motivation. Because people are working, okay, I'll get the money, then I'll buy this, and I'll enjoy, and like that. It's all material motivation. But you say, okay, I'll chant Hare Krishna, and if I do it right, you know, and if I follow it, then I'll get love of Krishna. You know, that's the goal. So the motive is prema, ultimately. That's okay, that's good. But it shouldn't be materially motivated. And that's what he just got through talking about these yajnas. Generally, you know, people worship a demigod, like Nanda Maharaj was going to worship Indra so that the rains will come, so that we'll prosper. And, you know, like it's transcendental. But that Krishna wanted to discourage him. You don't need to worry about that. You know, but he didn't say it, but he ultimately comes. You just worship me. You know, you just love me, and everything will be taken care of. But he's kind of hidden. He's playing the role of a human being. So he said, okay, we'll worship Govardhan Hill. You know, and with the cows, you know. That's really, anyway, so there's a double thing going on here. But, so Dharma is a method, a procedure. What is this bhakti yoga? Well, this is our supreme Dharma. And by following the Vaidhi Bhakti, the principles of devotion, then we can come to spontaneous devotion. That's the goal, spontaneous love. It's not like, oh, I have to get up and I have to serve Krishna. Oh, I really want to go out, you know, and serve Krishna. I really, you know, it becomes spontaneous. That's the goal. So the practice, the Bhakti Yoga, which is a Dharma, produces ultimately the same Dharma, the Sanatan Dharma, where we're reinstated in our eternal nature as servants of Krishna, loving servants of Krishna. So it's another pair. Dharma means two things. It means the means to get to the goal, and it means the goal itself. So, and I forget which word brought that to mind here. But that's, the worship of the demigods, in some sense, is a stepping stone to the worship of Krishna. Because at least you're worshiping the superiors, you're recognizing your dependence on higher forces and, you know, the Lord. And then when you learn, yes, who's giving Indra his power? Who's giving the Surya his power? Who do they worship? They're all worshiping Krishna. So I'll just worship Krishna directly, and then everything will be right. Okay, so here now we get to a very important verse about prasadam. Yagishishtashanak santo. Oh, yeah, that's the one we're on, right? 13? Yeah. Yeah. Muchyante sarvakilbishai. Bundate te bhagam papa. Ye pachantyatmakaranat. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. Purport. The devotees of the Supreme Lord, or the persons who are in Krishna consciousness, are called santas, and they are always in love with the Lord as it is described in the Brahma Samhita, 538. Premanjana chudita bhakti vilochanena santa sadaiva hridayeshu vilokayanti. The santas, being always in a compact of love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, the giver of all pleasures, or Mukunda, the giver of liberation, or Krishna, the all-attractive person, cannot accept anything without first offering it to the Supreme Person. Therefore, such devotees always perform yagyas in different modes of devotional service, such as shravanam, kirtanam, smaranam, archanam, etc. That's hearing, chanting, remembering, worshipping, like that. And these performances of yagyas keep them always aloof from all kinds of contamination of sinful association in the material world. Others who prepare food for self or sense gratification are not only thieves, but also the eaters of all kinds of sins. How can a person be happy if he is both a thief and sinful? It is not possible. Therefore, in order for people to become happy in all respects, they must be taught to perform the easy process of Sankirtan Yajna in full Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, there could be no peace or happiness in the world. So I have to tell this little story because this is interesting. In my long devotional career, I've lived in different places and I had different experiences in each one. So in 1979, I think it was, I had the great opportunity to live in the 55th Street Temple. This was a legendary temple. It was in the Manhattan, in the mid-Manhattan. It was at least 11 stories high, and it was today we're worth probably $200 million. But somehow in 1978, they were able to get that building for $100,000. And the devotees had been saving money, in a Brooklyn temple to try to buy something. Finally, they bought it in New York. Prabhupada built that building. He stayed there, and it was the first Ratha Yatra in New York was organized out of that building. So anyway, I was, doing this kind of work, working, I think, Back to Godhead magazine. But when the marathon came, when the December marathon came, they wanted everybody to go out. So I said, okay, I'll go on the subways, and I went as Santa. We had a lot of Santas. So I'd make an announcement and I'd go around with some BTGs, One day I collected $300. It was my biggest day. They distributed a lot of magazine. So anyway, they would, in order to get the approval from the subway that we could do it, that we're not just, we had to show them that we're serious, And so we would point to this, this is our Bible, We point to this and we talk, look, the devotees of the Krishna consciousness were called Santas. They said, we're called Santas here. This is absolutely, what is this? San Diego, right? Isn't it Santa Fe? I mean, it needs a saint. So the same word, Santas, and we use this as a proof to try to get the license to go out on the Santas. Anyway, it's interesting. I don't know if they still do that, but it was quite an adventure. Hare Krishna. So let's see. So this is an important, verse about offering your food, because it's, first of all, you recognize that it's given to you, it's provided. Krishna's provided it, through the nature, and somehow, it's not that your food. Where does the food come from? Well, it comes from bonds. No, it doesn't come from bonds. It comes from the earth. It comes from the sun. Without the sun, the water, all of these things are necessary, and they're beyond our control. They are controlled, we understand, by higher beings, by God, demigods, who are ultimately beholden to God Himself. It's a big government. So this is how you develop your understanding of, relationship with Krishna. The idea is that understanding that it's coming from Him, so you prepare it for Him. The leaves, the flower, the water, and of course milk is there. So the vegetarian ingredients, when my devotees prepare preparations, out of these things, and they offer to them with love, with bhakti, that's mentioned twice, then I accept it. Krishna eats it with pleasure. And that remnant is then sanctified, means that it's full of spiritual potency. And it really brings you closer to Krishna. And the purification takes place. You know, your body is purified, your brain is purified and everything. So that's what this is verse about. Devotees are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is first offered for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin, which is quite a concept. In other words, and then kind of the restriction, you know, if you go sink down into the mode of ignorance a little bit. I remember, you know, growing up in New York, we would go into the city, but we didn't have so much money, so we wouldn't like sit down in expensive restaurants. But we would walk through the streets, and I remember seeing that just blew my mind. I mean, even as just an ordinary person, I couldn't fathom how people would do this. In the window of like an upscale restaurant, they would have a fish tank, and in the fish tank is a poor lobster there. You know, he doesn't know what's going on. He's, you know, doing his thing. Said, "Oh, you see how fresh our lobster is? You know, we'll just take this live lobster and put him into the pot of boiling water. It'll be fine." You know? That's why there's a hell called Kumbhipaka. Did you ever hear it? Kumbhipaka. Yeah. Kumbhipaka means being boiled in a big pot. You know, if you do that to the live animals like lobster, then you'll end up in a pot also eventually. That's the idea. It's in the 5th canto. Very sobering chapter. That was what I edited when I worked on the marathon. Whoa, this is heavy stuff. Middle of the night. Oh God. I always like to mention, you know, there were illustrations for that part. All the Bhagavatam has a color section, you know, so you get there's an illustration of that. So originally they were done as paintings, but no one wanted to hang up those paintings in their apartment, you know. So I said, okay, so I'm working on that chapter, so I have it up in my room, you know. I said, oh, okay. Very sobering chapters. I mean, hell exists. But it's not eternal. You know, there's not this eternal damnation thing. That's not there. But it can seem like a long, long, long time. You know. So if you know that, and you have some faith in it, and you have the alternative, the wonderful prasadam, then it says, well, I think I'll go with the prasadam. You know, I'm not going to risk doing the eating. I don't even want the meat anymore anyway. You know, that's the great blessing. You lose your taste for it. You know, you get the higher taste. We have the book, The Higher Taste. So this is a verse about performing sacrifice with your foodstuffs. Now here's another famous one, how grains are grown and we have sustenance, and it's all by the mercy of the Lord through the demigods, I think. Anad bhavandi bhutani parjanyat annasambhavaha yagyad bhavati parjanyo Yagya karma samudbhavaha. All living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yagya or sacrifice, and yagya is born of prescribed duties. Purport. Sri Baladeva Vijayabhushan, now he's the main commentator that Prabhupada relied on for writing these purports. The book is dedicated to him, if you look on the first page. Disciple, very learned disciple, that's why the Vijayabhushan, he has the ornament of knowledge. Srila Vijayabhushan, Srila Baladeva Vijayabhushan, a great commentator on the Bhagavad Gita, writes as follows: Ye indra jangataya vastitam yagyam sarveshwaram vishnum abhyarchatat chesham ashnanti tena tandehe yatram sampadayanti te santa sarveshwarasya yagya purushasya bhakta sarva kilbishayar anadikala vivid dhyar Atmanu bhava pratibandhakaya nikalai papaya vimuchante. Can you translate that? Okay, I can't either. I think Prabhupada translates it here. The Supreme Lord, who is known as the Yagya Purush, or the personal beneficiary of all sacrifices, is the master of all the demigods, who serve him as the different limbs of the body serve the whole. Demigods like Indra, Chandra, and Varuna are appointed officers who manage material affairs. And the Vedas direct sacrifices to satisfy these demigods so that they may be pleased to supply air, light, and water sufficiently to produce food grains. When Lord Krishna is worshipped, the demigods, who are different limbs of the Lord, are also automatically worshipped. Therefore, there is no separate need to worship the demigods. For this reason, the devotees of the Lord who are in Krishna consciousness offer food to Krishna and then eat, a process which nourishes the body spiritually. By such action, not only are past sinful reactions in the body vanquished, but the body becomes immunized to all contamination of material nature. When there is an epidemic disease, an antiseptic vaccine protects the person from the attack of such an epidemic. Similarly, food offered to Lord Vishnu and then taken by us makes us sufficiently resistant to material affection. And one who is accustomed to this practice is called a devotee of the Lord. Therefore, a person in Krishna consciousness who eats only food offered to Krishna can counteract all reactions of past material infections, which are impediments to the progress of self-realization. On the other hand, one who does not do so continues to increase the volume of sinful action, and this prepares the next body to resemble hogs and dogs, to suffer the resultant reactions of all sins. The material world is full of contaminations, and one who is immunized by accepting prasadam of the Lord, food offered to Vishnu, is saved from the attack, whereas one who does not do so becomes subject to contamination. Food grains or vegetables are factually eatables. The human being eats different kinds of food grains, vegetables, fruits, etc. And the animals eat the refuse of the food grains and vegetables, grass, plants, etc. Human beings who are accustomed to eating meat and flesh must also depend on the production of the vegetation in order to eat the animals. Therefore, ultimately, we have to depend on the production of the field and not on the production of big factories. The field production is due to sufficient rain from the sky, and such rains are controlled by demigods like Indra, the sun, moon, etc., and they are all servants of the Lord. The Lord can be satisfied by sacrifices. Therefore, one who cannot perform them will find himself in scarcity. That is the law of nature. Yajna, specifically the Sankirtan Yajna prescribed for this age, must therefore be performed to save us at least from scarcity of food supply. And there's at least one, if not more, instances where there was some drought in a city. This was in India, I think Hyderabad. And the devotees came there, Prabhupada had a program, and they sent them all out on Harinam, and boom, the rains came. You know that? You ever hear that? It's famous. Happened more than once. Yes? I'm sorry?
It happened multiple times.
During the Mayapur festival and everything?
No, it happened many times.
Many times, yeah. Yeah, okay. Let's see, one more. Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi. 15? No? Brahmakshara samudbhavam. Tasmat sarvagatam brahma. Nityam yagye pratishtitam. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. Purport. Yagyartha karma, or the necessity of work for the satisfaction of Krishna only, is more expressly stated in this verse. If we have to work for the satisfaction of Yagya Purush, Vishnu, then we must find out the directions for work in Brahma, or the transcendental Vedas. The Vedas are therefore codes of working directions. Anything performed without the direction of the Vedas is called vikarma, or unauthorized or sinful work. Therefore, one should always take direction from the Vedas to be saved from the reaction of work. As one has to work in ordinary life by the direction of the state, one similarly has to work under the direction of the supreme state of the Lord. Such directions in the Vedas are directly manifested from the breathing of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is said, Asya Mahato Bhutasya Nishvasitam Etad Yad Rigvedo Yajurveda Samavedo Tarvangi Rasaha, which means, quote, the four Vedas, namely the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda, are all emanations from the breathing of the great personality of Godhead. This is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.5.11. The Lord, being omnipotent, can speak by breathing air. For as it is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, the Lord has the omnipotence to perform through each of his senses the actions of all other senses. In other words, the Lord can speak through his breathing, and he can impregnate by his eyes. In fact, it is said that he glanced over material nature and thus fathered all living entities. After creating or impregnating the conditioned souls into the womb of material nature, he gave his directions in the Vedic wisdom as to how such conditioned souls can return home back to Godhead. We should always remember that the conditioned souls in material nature are all eager for material enjoyment, but the Vedic directions are so made that one can satisfy one's perverted desires, then return to Godhead, having finished his so-called enjoyment. It is a chance for the conditioned souls to attain liberation. Therefore, the conditioned souls must try to follow the process of yajna by becoming Krishna conscious. Even those who have not followed the Vedic injunctions may adopt the principles of Krishna consciousness, and that will take the place of performance of Vedic yajnas or karmas. Well, there's a little anyway. Thank you, Varuna. Illustrating the thrust of what we read today. So, anyways, another verse describing how our activity, if it's connected to the Lord through this process of yajna. Now, it's interesting that yajna and service, you know, what are you sacrificing when you perform a yajna? The idea is you're sacrificing your own interest to separate interest. And you're trying to work, do what the higher authority wants. So they'll be pleased and rain down some rain or whatever it is. So that's kind of what bhakti is about. But we go to the source of it all. And if Krishna is pleased, all the demigods are pleased. That's you don't have to worry, you know. And the motive is simply to do what Krishna wants. This is what the Bhagavad Gita is all about. Arjuna had his separate interest because he was so attached to Bhishma and Drona and all the other relatives that he wanted, his sense satisfaction was that he'll see them alive, that he won't be participating in killing them. And even if they kill, then he'll be long away. He'll be in the Himalayas doing his begging thing. He won't have to face that. So that was his own interest. But Krishna had an overall interest of reinstituting Dharma in the world, Paratanaya sadhanam vinashaya dushkritam. And so Arjuna was a key element of that, and now due to his material attachment, he was shirking his duty. So that's the whole background, the context of the Gita. And in the course of convincing Arjuna to fight, Krishna is presenting all the essentials of spiritual life, of the truth, and his own position especially in it. And that's the key, that Krishna is central to the Bhagavad Gita. He is the object. Ultimately, sarvadharma pade mamekam sharanam braja. Give up all these other dharmas that I spoke about. They're all subsidiary. You just do this one thing and you'll be successful. Surrender completely to me. In other words, you do what I want you to do, and you'll be happy ultimately in doing that, even though it seems like such a sacrifice for you because you're so attached. But if you rise above that and you see no one's going to die, and Bhishma and Drona will ultimately be benefited because they're great souls, and Bhishma is one of the Mahajans, I think, right? So bringing Arjuna from that, bodily concept to the concept, I'm the soul, I'm the servant of Krishna, and I'll do, yes, kadashe vachanam tava, then that's the culmination of the Bhagavad Gita. So he's covering all this, and he's talking about the demigods and their role, but ultimately they're subsidiary to Krishna. He's the ultimate joy of sacrifice. If you can please Krishna, then the demigods, they'll be automatically pleased. If you try to please them separately for some material desire, then you'll stay in the material meshes, birth, death, old age, and disease. So, and it becomes very clear in later chapters, no. Antavattu palamtesham tadbhavatya pamedisham, the worshippers of the demigods, whatever they get, if they do get the benefit, is temporary. Antavattu palamtesham tadbhavatya, they're not very smart. They don't have good brain. Devan Devi Joyanti Madbhaktayanti Mamapi. That you worship the Devis, you go to the Devis, you worship me, you'll come to me. So you see what's best, is obviously going to Krishna. Okay, we are almost out of time. Okay, I'll give you time for one little poem. Is it okay? Okay. Okay. Well, I'll give you a few of the verses from this Kevalashtika. Madaram madarevopi mangalevopi mangalam. Of sweet things, it's the sweetest you will taste at any time. Of things that bring good fortune, it's the perfect paradigm. Of things that purify, it purifies most powerfully. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Remember that our final breath may come at any time. Like that. No matter if we're old and sick or in our youthful prime. So young and old alike should chant the name incessantly. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a home program going on that most of the devotees are at, so that's why it's so quiet around here. We usually get a few others coming in.